Hey everyone, all right, so I'm back again after making the last video. There's something that I look for all over YouTube and everything, and all I can find is the older impacts, which aren't much different than the new M3, how to adjust the trigger. All right, so I'm gonna go ahead and figure out a way to set this phone down so I can show you everything. I'm not gonna adjust mine again because I've already adjusted it and got it right, but I'm gonna show you how to adjust yours. All right, it takes 3 different Allen keys to adjust the trigger. All right, you got the 2.5 millimeter, the 2 millimeter, and then that's burn off, but I think it's like the 1.5 millimeter or 1.25 or something, which are these 3 here. All right, so the first thing you got to do is take off this plate. And so I'm going to go ahead and fast forward it, me taking off the plate. All right, once the plate is off, you want to set it aside so that when so you don't end up losing the screws, and make sure that you don't lose them because they're kind of hard to find. All right, so down in here you can see all of the screws. So this front one up here is the screw that you would use to adjust like the creep in the triggers, like how much. Let me make sure it's not loaded. It's not loaded. All right, so how much the trigger creeps. So right now you can see that mine creeps a little bit because it's not cocked, but then when I cock it back and shoot it by holding the hammer so it doesn't dry fire, there's hardly any creep before it goes off at all. All right, so this one right here is the one that you adjust to adjust the creep, and that is the 1.5 or 1.25 millimeter Allen key that fits in there. All right, you do not mess with this one right here, this little screw. All right, on this back screw, this is your safety screw. To keep the gun from firing, you screw this one all the way in, and then the trigger won't move at all to fire. This big one right here is the screw that's got the spring and a ball bearing in it. That is the one that you adjust to adjust your sensitivity. The further out that you bring the screw, the lighter the trigger is going to get, but you have to be very careful. The screw is long, but if you adjust it too far, it could potentially fire on its own without you actually squeezing the trigger. All right, I backed mine out to about that far. I don't really know how many turns I did it, but it's about that far out. From the factory, it's a little bit further in, maybe flush. All right, like I said, this screw up here is the front screw. The further that you screw it in, it takes the creep out of the trigger. So the more you screw it in, the less creep you have. If you back it out, the more creep you're going to have, where it's going to go back and forth. Another way to lighten your trigger, and you want to do this with the trigger guard on. I shoot left-handed, so mine's canted the other way, but use this little tiny screw right here is a 1.27 millimeter. But you turn this screw out a little bit, and then you lower it down on that pin, and it will actually make the trigger, using leverage, seem lighter. All right, and that's about it. Before you do any adjusting, anything at all, make sure the gun is unloaded. A lot of the times, to be extra sure that it's unloaded, you want to take the tank off and maybe bleed out the regulators and make sure that the regulators don't have any air, just to keep any chance of dry fire in the weapon or the air rifle. Make sure it's completely unloaded and never dry fire it, and you'll be all right. Another quick disclaimer: the Allen keys, the screws themselves are in there kind of tight. It seems pretty tight, but they have Loctite on them, so it's going to be kind of hard to turn. Make sure that your Allen key, your hex key, make sure that it's fully seated down into that screw before you start turning on it. Otherwise, you're going to strip your screws.